Hello, this is Alan Brooks, and today we're going to be looking at two exciting subjects. One is the blood moon conspiracy, the other is the Revelation 12 star charts. Both portend the coming of Christ, or so they say. So what's it really about, Alan? What do you have to say on the subject? Not that we care. Right, I get that, guys. I'm married, I understand. My family hates me. Everybody, no one listens to me. My pastor, my family, my wife, they all just say, go away, shoo. We don't want to hear what you have to say. But anyway, just in case you do, I have some cool information. So what's the deal on the blood moons? In the last year, I must have heard every few months, there's a blood moon in July. There's a blood moon in September. There's 4 blood moons. Ooh, yeah, ah. Well, why is it so important? Well, the reason why everybody gets so excited is that Jesus said in Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will turn to blood, basically, and be dark, and the stars will fall from the sky. Then Jesus Christ will come back with a great trumpet call, and his angels will gather the elect from the 4 corners of the world. And so that's why people get excited, because they say, well, there's a blood moon there, and also many places in the Bible, Jesus comes back with a blood moon, and the stars darkened, and the sun also is darkened. So they say, hey, these are blood moons in the astrological timetables of our current knowledge of astronomy. Therefore, breathlessly, Jesus Christ could come back tomorrow on this blood moon, and when it was September 23rd or whenever it was, I don't remember. In fact, like I said, there's been 4 blood moons in the last year. And so that's what I'm pointing out, that people say that this means Jesus Christ has come back because he comes back with a blood moon. And I say a few things to that the people in Paul's day ask, well, Paul, did we miss the rapture? Did we miss the second coming of Christ? And Paul said, no. You have to see 2 things. You have to see an apostasy, and you have to see the Antichrist, the man of sin, being revealed in the temple. So what do you mean by all that, Alan? What do you mean by revealed? And what's this apostasy stuff? And what do you have to say about all this? Give me an answer now. And so I say to all of you guys, what that means, what Paul meant is you can't miss the rapture because you got to see a couple of things first. And in reality, Jesus said the same thing. You see, the essence of the end of time, we've heard it all of our lives, is that there's one last 7-year period known as the tribulation. But what a lot of people do not talk about is how that period is divided into 2. It's divided into half. Kind of the scenario that's all throughout the Bible. And what I've done that I don't think anybody else has done is I looked at all the Old Testament places that talked about this last 7 years. And all of them talked about an invasion of Israel when people say peace. And Paul said the same thing. He said, when people say peace and safety, the sudden destruction of the day of the Lord takes place. And so the only place there can be peace at this last 7 years is in the middle, when the Antichrist invades and breaks that peace treaty and causes Israel to say another end-time code word to flee for 3.5 years. So what's interesting is that the last 7 years is mentioned only once. In Daniel 9:27, it says that the Antichrist, makes an agreement for 7 years. But in the middle, he invades Israel. And then this starts the time of great tribulation, or the last 3.5 years. And so this last 3.5 years is mentioned actually 15 places, like 4 in Daniel, 3 or 4 in book of Revelation. It's mentioned all throughout the Old Testament. And it's mentioned by Jesus 3 or 4 times too, just to seal the deal. So I would say that that's more important. So, if we were trying to establish a timeline or a sequence of events for the Bible, we would look for this last 7-year period to be spoken about. To give you a metaphor, let's say you had a Bible about World War II. It would start with an event. It would start when Pearl Harbor was attacked, when people say peace. It would last about 3.5 years, and in the midst of those 3.5 years, you would see Midway and Okinawa, and it would end with the A-bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that would end the war, and then we would have a long peace treaty after that, or in biblical terms, the millennium. And so if we had a future book predicting, a future Bible-like book predicting World War II, that sequence of events would be set in stone. No matter how much we argued about all sorts of minutiae, the sequence of events of World War II would always be the same. It would start with Pearl Harbor. The next battle might be Midway, and then the next battle might be Okinawa, and then it would end 3.5 years later with the with the A-bomb being dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So again, the sequence of events would always be that way. Like that, the Bible also has the same sequence of events about this last 3.5 years. You know, it's always when people say peace. And when can people say peace? At the end, it's when the 7-year peace treaty is signed. Now, what might be interesting is that might be a secret aspect of, let's say this treaty that Obama made with Iran. You know, that could be a secret provision, this last, the 7-year part of it. So we always have to be watching. Anyway, in many, many places in the Old Testament, we see a certain sequence of events. It starts with an event, it ends with an event. The event it ends with is Jesus Christ coming back with the sun, the blood moon, and the stars falling. And the event it starts with is when this Antichrist invades Israel, and he comes into the temple, says he's God. Then Israel flees out of town really fast. And Jesus said, don't even get your stuff out of your house. And we used to wonder when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, why would they say that? Why would Jesus say, get out of town, don't get your stuff out of your house? Well, now we know why. Because Islam and Muslims will rip open pregnant women, and they hate Jews, and they'll kill the children even. And, that's even happened already. ISIS has ripped open pregnant women, and they've killed children and sold them for sex slaves. Now, who says the Bible isn't relevant for today? It's so funny. As a story, I actually sent somebody some of my theories, and they go, Alan, you are such a sad person. You are so stupid. You cannot take today's events and apply them to the Bible. Boy, what a dummy you are. So anyway, I guess ISIS isn't ripping open pregnant women, dude. Anyway, that's how people think. They're just really have their own ways of thinking. God bless them. And so what we have here is a sequence of events that's always the same. It's always the same throughout the Old Testament. During a false peace, Israel's invaded by an army from the north. This army trashes and desolates Israel. And then sometime later, Jesus Christ comes back with that blood moon that we've been talking about. Now what we have to do is use our heads and our noggins, because this sequence of events is all throughout the Old Testament. But what we have to understand is that they didn't know about the 3.5 year period part in Ezekiel and say Jeremiah and other places. So it looks like that this Israel's invaded during peace on the day of the Lord, and then suddenly Armageddon happens. But we know, because we're smart and we've read the scriptures, that there is a 3.5 year period. It's in Revelation 11:2. The Gentiles trample Jerusalem for 3.5 years. Revelation 13, the Antichrist rules for 3.5 years. Revelation 11 is the same way, that the two prophets speak for 3.5 years. Revelation 12, Israel is attacked by the dragon. She flees for 3.5 years. And that's a kind of a big code word as well. Jesus in Matthew 24 says the Antichrist invades and sets up this abomination in the temple. And then Israel does what? She flees. And so, my dog has fleas too, but that flea word is a big code word throughout the whole Bible. And it basically verifies my whole theory. Let's say, Ezekiel 7, it says, on the day of the Lord, Israel is attacked by the worst of the Gentiles, and then she flees to the mountains or escapes. And that's over and over. We see that through Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Israel's attacked during peace, and she flees. She gets out of town. And now we know that it's 3.5 years, and she flees possibly to America. We know a lot of us have been taught she flees to Jordan, which sure could be. But in Revelation 12:14, I think it says she was given 2 wings of a great eagle to flee possibly to America, because America is the eagle nation. And where else would Israel flee to if she was being attacked by Muslim hordes? Who else would help her but America? See what I'm saying? So that's my theory, is that all these places that talk about the last 3.5 years all have the same words and phrases to predict the same events by the same God in the same Bible. That's a little pet phrase the Lord told me. So doesn't that make sense that the Bible wouldn't be filled with just all sorts of strange theories and mysterious prophecies that we've got to go, deep into the weeds to figure out with our microscopes? That maybe the Bible just repeats the same information over and over again, like Pearl Harbor. It's always the same sequence of events when Pearl Harbor happens. It's always Pearl Harbor, it lasts 3.5 years, and then it ends with Hiroshima. Like that, the Bible is always during peace. The day of the Lord happens, which is an invasion of Israel at peace. Let me give you an example. Ezekiel 38 and 39. We've all been taught that Ezekiel 38 and 39 happens any time now. But I found that it is this Antichrist invasion in the middle of the final 7 years. How? Well, it says, on the day, in that day, Israel is invaded from the north while Israel is in peace, is peaceful and unsuspecting, by Gog, the very one all the prophets have spoken of. Now, let me ask you, who is the one all prophets have spoken of? Some odd character that means nothing? No, it's the Antichrist. He's the one that was spoken of by all the prophets. That's Ezekiel 38. The one all prophets have spoken of invades a peaceful Israel, and Israel is taken captive. And then it looks like immediately the Lord comes back at Armageddon. But since you and I are smart and we use our heads and our noggins, even as dumb as I am, a broken clock strikes twice a day, So, we know that after the Antichrist invades, it says 15 times that he's going to rule from Jerusalem for 3.5 years. So we have to add that in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And suddenly it makes a lot more sense. Antichrist invades, takes the peace, and we see that pattern in Revelation 6. Antichrist invades, takes the peace, causes famine and death, goes after the saints, and then at the end of Revelation 6, the sun, moon, and stars are darkened. Jesus Christ comes back, and everybody hides from him in the caves. Then Revelation 7, a great multitude is all around the throne from all over the world. And John says to the angel, who are these? Where did they come from? And he goes, they just got here instantly from all over the world. Now, people, if that's not the rapture, what is? You know what I mean? So that matches what Jesus said. When you see the Antichrist in the temple, he'll take the peace. And everybody flees, Israel flees. And Jesus said something remarkable. He goes, woe to women in those days who flee. Pray that your flight not be in winter, and those who are pregnant. Now we know why Jesus said that. That was pretty brill, Jesus, dude. It was pretty brill, man. Because ISIS and Muslims believe in ripping open pregnant women. That's pretty cool, Jesus, man. I respect you, dude. So anyway, what a remarkable prophecy that is. So we see the same pattern throughout the whole Bible, which is why the blood moon on some astrological event can't be Jesus coming back, blah, blah, blah. It can't be some instantaneous, oh my gosh, look, Jesus is coming back at this blood moon. No, Jesus and Paul and the whole Bible say one thing, that you have to see this Antichrist revealed first. And he has to rule for 3.5 years first. And then Jesus said, after the tribulation, immediately the sun, moon, and stars are darkened, and Jesus Christ comes back, and there's a rapture. Now, hey, people, if there's another rapture 7 years before, pre-tribbers, whatever, I'm cool. I'm hoping for it. But we know there's a rapture here after the tribulation, right? And so that's one of the first things I wanted you to know. There's one sequence of events that has to happen first before the blood moons, and where Jesus Christ comes back. And like I said, that sequence of events is set in stone, just like Pearl Harbor, Midway, Okinawa, and then Hiroshima. It's always the same. On the day of the Lord, during peace, a northern army invades and starts destroying Israel. And he stops the sacrifices in the new temple that Israel's going to build, and then he's going to trample Jerusalem for 3.5 years. Jeremiah 4, same thing, from the north. A horrible army led by aliens or watchers or fallen angels comes into Jerusalem. They take the peace when false prophets say peace, and they trample Jerusalem. And then there's some great huge battle in a valley. What could that be? And Jeremiah 6 through 8, the same. During peace, a false peace, when false prophets say peace, a northern army invades Israel. It's the same thing. Ezekiel 38 and 39. A northern army led by the one all the prophets have spoken of on that day, will invade an Israel that's peaceful and unsuspecting. Now, how could that be, Alan? You're certainly crazy there. Well, it says in Daniel 11:29 through 45 that the Shia Muslims will sweep down and actually take over the Sunni states of like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and all those other states around there, and even North Africa. And then they'll act like they're coming back home. And then all of a sudden, I think it's Ezekiel 21, this Antichrist says, he starts shaking the dice, looking in the feathers, looking at the tea leaves. Should I go after Israel? I'm a Muslim whose number one goal in life is to destroy Israel. That's what my goal is. So I decide, based on my shaking of the dice here, that I'm going to invade Israel. And, the Muslims are the Antichrist people who want to invade Israel during peace. And that's why Israel won't be suspecting. It'll be, as Daniel says, the kings of the north versus the kings of the south. And the difference is the Shias of the north and the Sunnis of the south. Now, the Shias hate the Sunnis, and so they actually want to come in and destroy ISIS, which is Sunni, and destroy Saudi Arabia, which they freaking hate, people. And then they're going to come back and act like they're going back home, and then he's going to come in and attack Israel, which is why Israel won't be expecting this. As Ezekiel 38 says, they are a peaceful and unsuspecting people. So people ask me, Alan, so you say the day of the Lord starts in the middle of the tribulation, but Joel 2:31 says before before the day of the Lord starts, the sun, moon, and stars are darkened. So you're just wrong, Alan. Well, I can tell you how I can deal with that. There's 50 places in the Bible that says the day of the Lord happens when people say peace. And then Israel is invaded and they're trampled for 3.5 years. And then the sun, moon, and stars are darkened. Then Jesus Christ comes back. So what's the story about Joel 2:31? Well, what the story is the word before there is lipni, and that can be translated as in I come before the king, not 20 minutes before. And so all of our lives we've been taught that the sun, moon, and stars happened before. But 50 other places say that Israel is invaded during peace. And we know that can't be at the end, because Jesus said the days at the end will be so bad unless I come back and cut short those days, no life would be spared. Now, that makes more sense. I'm going to go with the 50 places that say a northern army led by the Antichrist, or the worst of the Gentiles, Ezekiel 7, comes in and invades and defiles the temple, Ezekiel 8, and sets up an idol of jealousy in the temple, just like Revelation 13 and Ezekiel 8 says. So I'm going to go with all the places in the Old Testament and Paul, who said the day of the Lord is a destruction when people say peace and safety. So peace where? Israel. Safety where? Israel. That's the consistent story throughout the entire Bible. And that's how you interpret Revelation as well. The consistent story is after this tribulation, the sun, moon, and stars are darkened, and Jesus Christ comes back with a trumpet, and angels are rapturing all the saints. Now people say, well, Alan, you messed up. The bowls and seals are happening, the trumpets are happening, and so that has all the wrath of God. We're not appointed to wrath. Okay, I get you. I agree with you. So what's the deal? Well, the deal is I believe all that stuff kind of happens all at once. And the seventh trumpet blows right before Armageddon happens, and so we don't see any of the wrath of God. And that's why Revelation 16 says, Jesus said, I'm coming like a thief, people. Keep your clothes clean, my church. And the next verse says Armageddon happens, which is the consistent story throughout the entire Bible, all throughout Isaiah. Israel's invaded on the day of the Lord. Then Jesus stands like a banner and comes back. He whistles for his saints to come back and join him in the air. And then the millennium happens. That's Isaiah 1 and 2. And Isaiah 59, Jesus dresses in his garments of vengeance. And Isaiah 60, to come back, right? And then Isaiah 60, the glory of God comes in the darkness from the sun, moon, and stars being darkened. He comes back to Israel, and get this, it says, the Gentiles will come to your light. They will fly like doves to Jesus. So you get that? Isaiah 59, he dresses in the garments of vengeance. Isaiah 60, Jesus comes back, and we see a rapture. They fly like doves to Jesus. Now, isn't that stunning? That's my discovery. I don't know if anybody's seen that before, but if they have, God bless them. Like I say, I'm a broken clock who's right twice a day. So again, it's the sequence of events. Matthew 24, sun, moon, and stars are darkened. Jesus Christ comes back. A trumpet sounds, and the saints are raptured. Isaiah 25, 26, and 27 is the same sequence. Jesus comes back. The sun, moon darkened, Isaiah 25. Isaiah 26, a resurrection. Isaiah 27, a rapture with a trumpet where Israelites are gathered from the four corners of the world, just like Matthew 24. So you can see the same God used the same words and phrases to describe the same future events in a sequence of events that's set in stone. Exactly how it all come to pass, we can only guess, but we can't be too micromanageable about all this stuff. We can't get too caught up in every single detail. We have to look at the overall picture that's repeated 55, 60 times in the Old Testament, which is the same thing I've been telling you about, that the blood moons, when Jesus Christ comes back, is after the tribulation, and there's a rapture at that point. Now, if there's another rapture at the beginning, 7 years earlier, cool. I'm all for it. So then the next thing I wanted to talk about real quick, that was the blood moon conspiracy, and how I don't think the blood moon can happen in a natural astrological sense, and then, all of a sudden Jesus Christ will come back. I agree with Paul and Jesus when the disciples asked them, what's the sign of your coming? And he goes, well, you have to see the Antichrist in the temple first. He has to come in, and you have to flee out of Israel. He has to rule for 3.5 years, like Revelation 11:2 says, Revelation 13. And so next we're going to talk along those lines about the Revelation 12 conspiracy, which the smartest people I've seen, they start giving us all this incredible information about how the astrology of, the woman going into Leo the lion, she's giving birth. I mean, it sounds way cool, and I'm not criticizing these people at all. They're very smart people who are giving these teachings all over the internet, and they're saying because those astrological signs are happening right now, that, again, Jesus Christ can come back. Well, there's a couple of verses they leave out. They say the essence of Revelation 12 is this, that the devil's thrown down to earth. He knows his time is short. He's going to get really upset, because he's got that last 3.5 years that we've been talking about. And what's he going to do? He's going to go after Israel. And what does Israel do? Israel flees, just like all these places we've been looking at. That starts the last 3.5 years. Israel flees after they're invaded. And they flee where? Like I said, possibly to America. And they flee for how long? For 3.5 years, according to Revelation 12. And so some people, and the next part of that says that this woman with 12 stars on her head, like the astrological signs that are happening right now, she gives birth to a male child, and that child is caught up to the throne. And people go, aha, that's the church, that's the rapture. So when this astrological sign happens, that can happen anytime. The rapture can happen anytime. And I say, no, not really, people. Because that same scripture in Revelation 12 says that Israel has to flee for 3.5 years, and it says that child that was caught up to the throne will rule the nations with a rod of iron. Now, Revelation 19 says Jesus will rule the nations with a rod of iron, so I would interpret this in a traditional classical way, that the woman with 12 stars is Israel with 12 tribes, and Jesus is the son that was given birth in Israel. He's the one who's resurrected before the throne of God, and he's the one who will rule the nations with a rod of iron. That's Revelation 19:4-5, I believe. And then at the end of Revelation 12, it says that the dragon, since he couldn't get to Israel because she was flown with the two wings of a great eagle to America possibly, he couldn't get at her, so what does he do? He goes after the saints. He goes after those who give the testimony of Jesus Christ. So again, if I have a question for you guys, okay, if the church was raptured up to heaven, who are these people that are going to be, taken out by the Antichrist, who are going to be attacked, like ISIS killed 200,000 Christians? It says that the dragon can't get to Israel, so he goes after the church. Now, if the church in heaven, how's he going to get there? What's he going to do? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You have to read all the scriptures. So two things about the Revelation 12 sign that doesn't make sense. Sure, it's cool, but the child could not be the Christian church rising up in the rapture, and Israel is the one who's fleeing, like all these other places. Matthew 24:15, when you see the Antichrist in the temple, Israel flees. Daniel 9:27, Daniel 9 and Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 talks about this last 3.5 years. And in many places all throughout the Old Testament, when the Antichrist invades, Israel flees to the mountains. That's a little sequence there that's all throughout the Old Testament. And so to end up, Revelation 12 is not the rapture. It can't happen. None of this can happen until we see, like Paul said, the Antichrist in the temple, and we see a great apostasy, which, Islam could be. We used to wonder growing up, who is the Antichrist? Well, there's three things that the Antichrist wants to do. He wants to invade Israel and destroy her. That's what Muslims want to do in Islam. He wants to cut off heads. Revelation 19, I believe, says the Antichrist cuts off heads. And, in today's reality, who wants to do both of those things? Muslims, Shia Muslims. That's what they do, people. So it's no question Islam is Antichrist. And then the third thing, the Dome of the Rock it's written on its side, God has no son. And, the Antichrist denies that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's what it is. So, and the other thing you find that's really interesting is the Bible. We've all heard all of our lives how 666 is the Antichrist religion. And if you look at the 666 in the book of Revelation in the Greek, it looks 100% like there is no God but Allah in Arabic. Now, come on, people. Who could do that but God? And so this is four things that the Antichrist is predicted to do that Islam wants to do today. So no, the Catholic Church is not Antichrist. They're not going to invade and cut off heads. No, the President of the United States is not the Antichrist. It's a northern Gentile from northern Shia nations. That's what the consistent story of the Bible is. So even though the astrological signs are lining up and they look way cool, it's not going to happen, people. You're not going to have the Lord coming back until the Antichrist is revealed in the temple, till you see a great apostasy, and until you see the sun, moon, and stars darkened. Yes, with that blood moon, you're not going to see Jesus Christ coming back, which is why Jesus in Luke 21 said, when you see all these signs, the Antichrist in the temple, Jerusalem surrounded by armies, and the sun, moon, and stars being darkened, when you see all of them, Luke says, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. So that is when I'm going to be looking up. Of course, I'm ready for a pre-trib rapture. That's way cool, man. Let's hope it's true. But the real Bible says that there's one last 7-year period that ends with the sun, moon, and stars being darkened. It starts the last 3.5 years with the Antichrist invading Israel. And when these last 3.5 years start, Jesus says, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. This is Alan Brooks. You can email me at abrook8, the number 8 at AOL.com. I'll be happy to answer any question you may have.